Ray Holloway had farmed the same 60 acres outside Millbrook for 31 years, and in all that time, nobody had ever seen him do anything as strange as what he did on a rainy Tuesday in October. He drove his rusted pickup to the county livestock auction, sat through 3 hours of cattle and goats, and then raised his hand for a lot nobody else wanted. 63 ducks, every single one of them blind. The auctioneer barely believed it. "You sure, Ray? These birds can't see a lick. Farm Upstate was gonna call him." Ray just nodded and paid $11 a head, pocket change compared to healthy stock. He loaded the ducks into crates, careful with each one, and by sundown, all of Millbrook knew Ray Holloway had bought a truckload of blind ducks. The laughter started at the diner the next morning. Dwayne Fitch, who ran the feed store, couldn't stop grinning as he rang up Ray's order of duck feed. "What are they gonna do, Ray? Walk into a fence and call it a day?" Even Ray's own nephew, Cole, home from college for the weekend, shook his head at the sight of the birds stumbling around the yard, bumping into buckets and each other, quacking in confused little bursts. "Uncle Ray, I love you, but this might be the dumbest thing you've ever done." For 3 years running, Ray's soybean and corn fields had been getting torn apart by Japanese beetles, not just his, but half the county's. The bugs came in waves so thick they'd strip a leaf to lace in a single afternoon, leaving whole rows looking skeletal by midsummer. Pesticide helped some seasons, hurt the soil worse, and cost more every year, eating into a margin that was already thin. Ray had read somewhere, in an old dog-eared farming journal from the 1970s his father had left him, that ducks were some of the best natural pest control there was, better than chickens, because ducks didn't scratch up the roots, and they went after beetles, slugs, and grubs with a kind of single-minded hunger chickens never bothered with. But healthy ducks cost real money, and a flock big enough to make a difference across 60 acres would have run him thousands he didn't have. Then he'd heard, through a cousin who worked poultry auctions, about a hatchery upstate with a genetic mishap in one of their breeding lines, an entire batch of ducklings born without sight, useless for a commercial farm that needed egg production and predator awareness. Nobody wanted them. They were headed for the cull list. Ray realized something the rest of the county hadn't stopped to think about. Ducks don't hunt beetles with their eyes. They hunt with their bills, dabbling low through grass and mud, feeling for movement, smelling and tasting as they go. A duck's eyesight barely mattered for the one job Ray needed done. So while Millbrook laughed, Ray got to work. He didn't turn the ducks loose right away. First, he let them learn the pen, every trough, every ramp, every corner, until they moved through it like they'd been born there. He walked the paths himself over and over, laying rope along the edges so the ducks could follow the texture with their bills, and he spoke to them the same way each time he refilled their feed, so they'd learn his voice as a signal that food and safety were near. Cole thought his uncle had genuinely lost his mind, spending hours training birds that couldn't even see him do it. But slowly, week by week, the ducks stopped stumbling. They moved in tight, confident clusters, following sound and touch and the calls of the birds around them, until the pen that had once looked like chaos looked almost choreographed. By the following spring, when the beetles came back, and they always came back, crawling up out of the ground in early June with their metallic green shells glinting in the sun, thousands of them descending on the young soybean plants within days, Ray was ready. He built long, low corridors of chicken wire running between his rows, funneling a path the ducks already knew by feel from months of practice in the pen. Then, on a cool June morning with dew still on the leaves, he opened the gate. At first, even Ray held his breath. 63 blind ducks waddled uncertainly into the corridor, quacking, bumping the wire, a few turning back toward the pen out of habit. But then one duck, a big pekin hen his granddaughter had absurdly named Waffles, found a beetle-covered stem and snapped it up. Then another duck copied the sound of her bill working. Then another and another. Within 20 minutes, the whole flock had spread down the row, bills dipping and snapping in a steady rhythm, moving almost like a single organism feeling its way through the field. They couldn't see the beetles crawling on the leaves above them. They didn't need to. Dwayne Fitch drove out 2 days later to see for himself, expecting a mess, maybe some drowned or lost ducks tangled in the wire. Instead, he found Ray standing at the edge of a soybean field that should have been half-eaten by mid-June, and it was clean, leaves intact, stems untouched, not a beetle in sight for the first time in 3 years. The ducks, meanwhile, were fat and loud and thriving, herding themselves along the rope-lined paths like they'd lived there their whole lives, calling back and forth in a low, satisfied murmur. Word spread fast, faster than the jokes ever had. Neighboring farmers who'd been losing whole sections of crop to the same beetle swarm started asking Ray where he'd gotten his birds. The hatchery upstate, the one that had been about to cull an entire blind line as a loss, suddenly had more requests than they knew what to do with, and started keeping the blind hatchlings on purpose instead of discarding them. Ray became something of a local legend, not for the trick itself, but for seeing something nobody else had bothered to look for. A blind duck doesn't need eyes to find a bug. It just needs a place it knows by feel, and something worth chasing. By the second season, Ray's fields were the healthiest in the county, and he hadn't sprayed a drop of pesticides since the ducks arrived. His soil, which had been growing harder and more depleted every year from chemical runoff, started coming back too, earthworms returning, the ground softer underfoot. Neighbors leased small flocks from him during beetle season, trading labor or seed for a few weeks of duck patrol, and some started raising their own blind flocks the same way Ray had. Even Cole, home again from college, stood at the fence one evening and admitted his uncle had been right all along. "I really thought you'd lost it, Uncle Ray." Ray just watched the ducks work their way down another row, calling to each other in that low, contented murmur they made when they were busy and fed. "Everybody looks at what a thing can't do," he said. "I just needed something that could do one thing real well. Turns out blind was never the problem. Eyes were never the point." Dottie, standing beside him with a mug of coffee, laughed for the first time about the whole ordeal, not at Ray, but at the whole town, at Dwayne Fitch and his jokes at the feed store, at every person who'd shaken their head that October morning. $11 a head," she said, shaking her head. "Best investment you ever made, and I fought you on it the whole way." The story made its way around Millbrook for years afterward, the way stories do in small towns, a little exaggerated each time it was told, though the truth needed no help. 63 ducks nobody wanted had saved a season nobody thought could be saved, not through some miracle, but through Ray noticing what everyone else had overlooked, that sight and skill aren't always the same thing, and sometimes the animal, or the person, written off as broken is exactly the one built for the job in front of him. By the time the beetles came the following June, nobody in Millbrook was laughing anymore. They were lining up at Ray Holloway's gate, asking to borrow his ducks, and Ray, remembering every joke from that October morning, was happy to let them.